Oh, hey. Hey there. Oh, but where are you? There you are. Hey, it's Chris from Airwindows. This is the Monday Q&A session. Also, it can be considered the Hangout session or any number of other things. And David here. Hey, dude. Hope you're feeling chill. This is not a good day to be, like, freaky and demanding for me or you. So I'll try to avoid being freaky and demanding. How's that? Oh dear. What? What the? Oh my. I might have to stop streaming for a second, guys. You know why? Because I'm bombing the server with insanely high encoding rates. It should not be doing that. It's set wrongly. But you know what? One thing we could do is, no, it's okay. You gotta roll with stuff sometimes. If I have anything that is an advantage to me, it's my ability to roll with stuff. And so I will gladly hang on to that as like a good thing to have or a good thing to be. Oh, and now it randomly cut down to closer to what the. So don't worry about what I'm chattering about. I have been fooling with encoding settings and stuff and trying to get stuff to work better, and it isn't always a smooth process. Let's fiddle this around where we're aiming properly. Yeah, I'm basically wrestling with OBS half the time. Oh yeah? You know, I had to give up drinking, David. I found that people didn't want me around. But that was me. Anywho, I have not used VCV Rack much. We've had this conversation not long ago, actually. And in the Calibre plugin release, that I'm into my hardware modular synthesizer to the point where I've even built stuff for it some of the time. I'd like to build hardware stuff, and I'd like to teach people how to build DIY stuff like that. But it kind of stops me from getting heavy into VCV Rack. Plus, my computer is not really strong enough to run VCV Rack well. Like, I think that there are some limitations, and there's a lot of PC users, including people who are really into gaming, who can run with VCV Rack much more effectively than me. Because like the Uber gaming PCs are able to dominate on VCV Rack because, you know, it's just a program. I'm running a not especially spectacular iMac. Or, no, it's not even, and that was the I'm running a Mac Mini, and although it's got some nice qualities, it's definitely interesting to work out like what its capacities are, and I'm not yet to a point, I feel, where I can really get the fullest out of doing VCV Rack, although I've been thinking about trying to do streams like that. And for some time now, and there's a bit of an obstacle to this, by the way, but for some time now I have wanted to be porting my stuff to VCV Rack. It's just a big pile of work to do, as you might imagine, with the number of plugins that there are. I also don't necessarily have the help of my brother anymore, and that's a story that I'll get into. I'm sure he's not going to be seeing any of this talk because it's kind of how that works. quick question from Syed Arif Al-Hoq. If you use character plugins in 48K, yeah, it'll work fine. What you might get is a slight difference in tonality. You might get it, you might get a slight difference in tonality, and you'll essentially be pitching up the tone of the character plugin, but there's no reason it wouldn't work. It'll still work. See whether you like what it does at 48K, or indeed 98 or 96 or 192. Either of those ones, you could still run it. It's just a question of, do you like what it did? And in some of these cases, like this caliber, which has a capacity where you can like dial out the lows, you might find that if you love what it does to highs, hot coffee. If you love what it does to highs, you might like it even better at something like 192K, because it'll go even higher in pitch, essentially, like what you roll off, and essentially the phase kind of cancels it out. You'll be able to do that over a broader range, and the highs that you get out of it at a higher sample rate are going to be scaled up even more. No, it's not like bus colors 4. It was enormous trouble coding bus colors to adapt to higher sample rates, and it's done in a weird way. I'll probably eventually revisit it. Affirmation, I may possibly answer all the questions. It depends upon like when you ask them and how many other people are talking and stuff. I don't really do a thing of like not answering most questions. Occasionally there are questions that are, let's just say, tangentially related to miking and engineering, and I reserve the right to not answer all of those ones, but it's fairly likely that I'll answer or try to answer all your questions, and that goes for all of you. So that's just a thing. So, you're fooling with dithering. That's clearly, we're going to have a big pile of questions there. That is always fuel for having the many questions, and we'll see what we get out of that. By the way, I might seem sniffly and maybe a little sore throaty. I'm not feeling really bad. It's just that ever since I got sick a month ago, I don't feel I ever really totally shook that off. And so that's one of the reasons I'm like holding up, and I'm doing the social isolation thing real strict. Like, I've got stuff socked away, and I'm being extremely responsible, to the point where I have family members that I'm not getting along with right now because they're like, "Oh, you're full of it. This is nothing." And I'm like, "Oh, no, honey, you're more of at risk than me." And I may have already had a taste of this. I did not like it. I'm on video as sick as a dog and feeling like crap, and I don't want to mess with that mojo any longer. So first question, is Ditherfloat of any use at all? It's a demo. It shows you the principle that is currently active in like all plugins that I make. It's built into the output stage. So essentially, if you're using a Airwindows plugin at all, and this goes way back, I had that phase where I took the mechanism of it and I updated literally every plugin that I did. And then I got into a complicated argument with various people in which I refined it. And there's a there's a perverted version of Ditherfloat. No, there is a tuned version. I don't know where I got that. A tuned version of the juice is too hard for me. I can't do it. a tuned version of ditherfloat, and that's been going into plugins for like a solid half a year now. And some people were like, but haven't you updated all the other plugins with the tuned version of you fixed ditherfloat? Isn't it a big deal? No, actually it's not a big deal. It goes into current versions of stuff for at least the last half year, because that'll happen fairly quickly once I release the big everything gets updated. And the previous version did a really good job of stopping obvious like grind and quantization noise on exaggerated settings that are really very far beyond what you're functionally going to be able to hear. The tuning was in getting it up to like analytical standards. So it went from fixing problems happening at about 400 dB down to fixing problems that were happening 4,000 dB down. Like with the help of the guy from Isotope, Alexei, and the thread on Gear Sluts in which we were talking about this, we were able to like nail down, and it ended up being entirely my code because I wound up like Alexei from Isotope fixed the bug in my plugin and fixed the slight irregularities in the measurements, at which point I turned around and fixed his fix and came up with a best guess at what the actual correct numbers were and different implementations of things. And so I wound up with an MIT licensed open source version that's not exactly the same as what Alexei has on tap, meaning that Isotope has this accessible. That's anybody's guess as to whether they're going to do anything about it, but they don't have to. There's no reason for it. But yeah, we went from fixing problems 400 dB down to fixing problems that are about 4,000 dB down, and current stuff is released like that. And the grand update that like killed my website because everybody was downloading and the hosting company kicked me offline, that was the fixing stuff at 400 dB down stage. So essentially when you say, is ditherfloat of any use at all? Not really as a standalone plugin, because it is already in place in all the stuff that I do. That said, if you're specifically working in VST, it's no use at all on Core Audio. It's no use at all in AU form, because that, yeah, they are all open source. And I've even got some templates of how I build stuff, but I can't help you set them up because it's great trouble for me setting them up too. But they do exist. I have templates of like, this is what I'm building stuff out of and what I'm starting from. If you can get these to compile, you're off and running. But yeah, on 32-bit bus hosts, like anything that runs Core Audio or certain kinds of VST, ditherfloat cannot be useful because as a plugin, you need to be having it running on a 64-bit bus to put out a 32-bit output that makes sense. It can be used with like no extra boost or no extra manipulation, and it will put out a dithered to 32-bit float output. So if you're on a 64-bit bus, technically you can save to 32-bit float and have that be dithered. The relevance of this is not great. I always say over and over again that like these are more of interest to plugin makers who are going to be returning to 32-bit over and over again on certain hosts. All of my stuff also returns to 64-bit and dithers for the VST hosts. That's even more ridiculous and not especially useful. I do it because it's like, well, I already have the code, I already have the efficient random generator and stuff, so let's give this a shot. But on the whole, dither float is not useful to a mixer or mastering engineer. On the whole, like, I really hesitate to say if you're working at 64-bit and you're going to, like, you might as well use something like monitoring and do a high quality dither to 24-bit, and that's going to be effectively as good, you know, if not better, because my 24-bit dither, the not just another dither, is using Benford realness calculations, so it's possible that it will sound better than dithering to 32-bit. Because dithering to 32-bit will correct the basic mathematical issue of having this stream of numbers that's accurate. And that works when you're stacking plugins on top of plugins on top of plugins. But if you're trying to create an audio output that sounds optimal as part of a mixed stage, you might be better off using that. You might be better off using a dither to fixed point. So, yeah, go figure. So, audio plugins, yeah, I can probably talk about that stuff to some extent as well. I'm not right now, and I'm keeping an eye on my streaming. The last time I did one of the Minecraftist Hangout session streams, it was a bit of a shit show in that like my co-players were blowing me and each other up and stuff, and we're probably going to be re-evolving how we do that, just so that we can have something that's a little more civilized to play. You know, fewer super weapons and fewer, like, you know, less trolling of all kinds, basically. Because especially now, we really need situations where people can chill with each other, like, and dare I say it, feel safe. It feels a little bit weird because I routinely put up with, like, levels of abuse that get to the point where I can't sleep at night and shrug it off. That's usually family stuff. But I got a lot of sympathy for people who want more civilized environments, and so I'm prepared to go in that direction as well. And yeah, you know, as far as cloning my GitHub, you might find that a little overwhelming, so you might want to just take some of the individual plugins. And again, on the GitHub, in the Airwindows section, should be some template files, and that's actually the stuff I work from. I work from that. I start out with the template thing, which maybe not quite to the point where you could compile it immediately and it would work, but I think sometimes I've got it set up where it actually would. And then I change stuff from there, or I read stuff out of another plugin that does similar things and use that. So yeah, the GitHub will be a big help. Syed has a quick question, which is, will bus color punch mode work better than API clips? It's different. It's not the same. You might prefer API clips. They're coded differently. The bus color stuff all is working on a kind of time constant. I decided at the time that what I was doing was weird because I was essentially, like, there was a extent to which my reconstruction of a imaginary dynamic convolution thing was not what it could be, because I could have it be smoothing out the time constant a little bit, and that way you'd have different reactions at different levels, like sustained loud at a certain sample in a high level would be a different result from, like, just transient loud at a extremely high level. And that's what bus colors became, was starting to incorporate this fanciness where it's maintaining a more of an average loudness, really. and that is determining what the reconstruction is going to be. And that means that not all of the signals are going to be exactly the same. Like, you could have a sample value of 0.9217, and the output wouldn't be the same every time you hit that sample point. It wouldn't be just a fixed transfer function that's really, really complicated and weird. It would be an even more complicated one that's not always returning the same thing. That said, it didn't necessarily help the sound. It's just what I did with bus colors. And I know some people like the character plugins better. That's one of the reasons I'm putting them out, is that there are fans of that original version. So the thing about that is I can't tell you. It's going to be what you like about the things. And I still have the basic code, which is very, very tiresome and messy. That code is a bear to work on. It's like working on half a small novel in terms of just endless lines of little math operations. In many ways, not very well worked out. Like, I could do it better now, I think, but it's a huge pile of work, and it's not exactly what I'm always working on. I'm not always working on applying a Codasonic paint on things. I do have another question from Infinity. Dither float pushed it to 11. What do you mean by pushed it to 11? Because you may be just doing something horribly wrong, honestly. Or not, I wouldn't say wrong as much as I would say you're basically doing what old samplers did. So you're doing a weird form of bit crush. And you're allowed to do that. There is no reason you can't. But be aware that's what you're doing. So what I mean by that is, if you bit crush, what you do is you run through a plugin that knocks things down to a really low bit, and then maybe records the output of that back into your audio bus. So it's really low bit that's being contained within a higher bit output. It sounds like if you mean pushing it to 11 bits as a final thing, yeah, you're bit crushing. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Strangely, do you know what you're effectively doing? And this is not a joke. David, are you still here? You could do that in ULaw. I shit you not. I'm not joking. What you're doing is essentially the same thing as running ULaw and a bit crusher inside it. That's literally what you're doing. And you're liking it because it is kind of neat doing, bit crush effects and doing that old school, not everything is linearly encoded thing. That has a quality to it. But essentially what you're doing is you're bit crushing the hottest peaks and making them a little coarser. So, yeah. So there you are. This is a very special day. This was a day when ULaw legitimately came into the conversation as a valid answer. You might explore looking into running ULaw and sticking BitGlitter or something inside it, because you're apparently doing something similar and finding it to be desirable. If you use dither float and push it way up and have it set to fully dither stuff, or even if you don't, what you're doing is a form of bit crushing, because that's all the pushing of dither. That's all the pushing of dither float as a demo does. It has no other purpose. The only purpose of that control is to make the sound worse and bit crush to the point where you can hear what's being done. Because it was important to be able to demonstrate it, to say, like, this is what's happening and this is what it sounds like when you're hearing the quantization on a floating point number, which is normally happening at such a faint level that you're never going to hear it directly. But it's stuff that builds up. Happy Guy has a quick question. Have I looked into using test-driven development? I might be using it already. Depends upon how you define it. Like, I don't know exactly what you mean. I'm not a buzzword guy. I don't use like Silicon Valley workflow techniques. That's not really my way. You're not going to find me doing that. So I'd need a slightly better definition of what that is. I can tell you how I do what I do. I'd be more than happy to do that. We got time too, because it's 11:27. I'm going to be going until like 12:40. 12:39. I'm going to go past 12:39. Because again, people have not responded to me talking about how you don't actually need to be on my Patreon right now if you're better off taking care of yourself, and people have responded by other people jumping on them, whatever. One guy on KVR scolded me, and he was like, if people want to help you, you should let them, rather than sassing them. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Old Luxor and new Luxor do not sound identical. If you mean what's in bus colors, they do not sound identical. The old character plugin should sound identical to the new character plugin. The only difference being that it dithers to the floating point, output bus, and stuff like that. But it's really designed to be the same thing as what the original plugin was. So that has not changed at all. Yeah, so by all means ask questions about how I go about the process of developing. I think that's all the questions at the moment. People get stroppy on me and if I miss their questions, and so I'll try to avoid that to the best of my ability. Indeed, yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons, Purist Gain is a pretty good gain plugin. BitShift Gain is the purest gain plugin you can possibly have, but Purist Gain gets pretty close. There's not a big difference there. And there shouldn't be that much of a difference from regular DAW gain plugins, but I guess it depends upon how they're implemented. Like if stuff is like repeatedly multiplying by literally 1 and then multiplying by other things, there's a number of ways in which you can change the actual data in there. Gamma, I will indeed do a hang stream on Wednesday, and we also talked a little bit about our experience last time that got real messy. I had a number of difficult experiences. One of them was that the connection kept dropping and I kept having to restart the stream, so that went weirdly. And the other one was, folks were sassing me a lot in chat, so that doesn't always happen that way. And David was drunk, that's one of the reasons he was getting sassy. And also people in-game were getting very violent and destructive. And it went to this place where it's like, let's all get together at spawn and blow up spawn some more. And I lost a lot of stuff that I had because some of our players were like blowing me up and killing me on purpose. And that's really not the purpose of the hang stream. That's not the vibe we're shooting for. So we had a little conversation about that after we stopped streaming. Not a heavy, aggressive, nasty conversation, because I try to avoid that. But a conversation along the lines of like, maybe we want to pivot this in some way. So what we might well do, Gamma, since you're on the server and sometimes show up for it, we're thinking about doing Wednesday and doing one more Wednesday of just like building up resources and stuff. And then what we'll do is, the guy blowing stuff up? Everybody was doing a certain amount of that. Shattered Song was doing stuff where he was blowing, making insane vortexes of madness, and getting people to observe them from a safe place so that he could show a cow tornado and weird stuff like that. And then Turner showed up and was killing us by throwing zombies and things at us, which may or may not have been necessary, because that's the thing. It's like, if it becomes a real pattern, then at least it's irresponsibility. And it's hard for me to tell whether it was antagonism or not. I mean, with that guy, it's difficult to tell. We don't agree on a lot of things, and I have given him years of playing on servers and stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's the kind of nice person who would not just look to straight up kill me or hurt my stuff or spoil my day. So it's challenging, but some people are not nice people, and I'm in a process of learning how that works and learning what boundaries are and how to set them. So that's a whole thing. But we had the conversation, and it was a smooth enough conversation. I'm getting back to some of the audio questions, so we'll get back to that. But bottom line regarding Gamma listening to what we're going to be doing on Wednesday, we're probably going to get together, build up resources using the mechanisms available in Snowball, protect a bunch of places, and also we can either completely destroy Spawn just for fun, but at any rate set up Spawn so that it will become regenerated. And then the week after that, we are going to be probably, unless I have a major change of heart about this, changing the mod. And by that I mean it will no longer be the Snowball Madness thing. All of the stuff about snowballs and weird effects become a moot point. So if you wanted to use like construction things and make giant cylinders that you later turn into bases, this is the time. And if you wanted to use the ability to like make lots of shulker boxes and fill them with stuff and then duplicate them using some of the technologies, this is the time, because that's going to go away and it's going to become a lot more like vanilla Minecraft with some of the same things. Like we're going to have the same seed because it's a cool seed with a cool spawn. We're going to have the same hiding of coordinates, but we're going to be running the mod Experimental Geography, which is another thing that I also programmed. It's another thing that I programmed with Dan. This is one of the things where I programmed it with my brother. He didn't think anything of it at the time, but it came together really fast. And then I worked on it for years after he gave it up. And what that does is when you dig down, instead of just getting, the underground as normal, you can dig down far enough to where you're in this infinite series of weirdly interconnected tunnels and things of all different sizes and scopes, and there can be treasure chests. In fact, there's loads of treasure chests everywhere, and there can be stacks of spawners, which are really daunting. So you basically go down into this infinite world of interconnected caves and things and just try to hold areas and sort of tame it. But since it's Minecraft, it continues forever. So that's an extra something to do. Like you can live underground or you can live in the overworld. Yeah, there is a trailer that is about experimental geography. So that's the basic idea. Not all of it is exactly the same as it is in the trailer, but it's the same basic idea. And we're probably going to switch to that because it's like additional stuff to do, but we might just end up like playing vanilla Minecraft instead. and that'll just be there. It'll mean that if you travel around a lot, we're going to get tons of lag because it's generating all this crazy stuff underground. But the crazy stuff underground is kind of fun and interesting. So it's like, and it also means that if you were trying to like grind for resources or XP or something like that, oh boy, do you have all of the spawners available. There's areas down underground in this mod where you can have this massive stack of something like blaze spawners. It's just bonkers. It's really dangerous down there. It depends upon the more deep down the biome is, because it's biome sensitive. The more intense the rewards and the more intense the dangers become. Yeah, I think you're thinking of Shadowed rather than Shauna. Let me get back to the questions though, because I can get back to this anytime. And in fact, we'll be spending maybe a bunch of hours doing this on Wednesday. So anybody who wants to hear more about that can show up for that. And I'll tell you another thing. When I logged on and had the conversation about the maybe switching over to experimental geography, I caught Shauna Wolf and Shadowed Song playing GTA 5 together. So I can't play that because my Mac isn't set up to run Windows and run GTA 5 just for that purpose. And the stuff that I'm doing on it, it's like I don't want to dedicate that much of the poor machine to something like that. But they're playing GTA 5 together online. So these are the things that you do when you go into lockdown or whatever, is you find stuff to do. So they're not going to be deprived of blowing stuff up. Believe me. It was really fun to listen to them playing some of that, even though I couldn't play with them. Because, yeah, if that's your jam, and believe me also, that's not Turner's or Shauna's only jam. We have another, maybe you should hang out with them. Like, they were talking on the TeamSpeak, so if you spot them on the TeamSpeak, and there's a web page I can give you later on the on my Applejack's webpage, where you can find the TeamSpeak kind of sort of dashboard. Anyways, yeah, if you can play GTA 5, you could join them. And yeah, they were having all kinds of fun because that is a much more appropriate game for blowing everything up. It was very funny. They were having a lot of fun. I would probably have joined them, but I was going to say, we have other Minecraft servers, and we've always kept one that's not public. It's like whitelisted and stuff. That's just it's not a creative server. It's a vanilla server, but it's the build stuff and settle in and be at home server. And Shadow to some extent, but Shauna and interestingly Turner to a huge extent have built glorious, astonishing, amazing things on this server that I just keep up. It now runs on the laptop that I've got, the laptop that I got from Dan, actually. And that is not a blow things up server, but some of these folks, not all of us, like I don't do as much of it left to my own devices because I'm always working. And Shadow does some of this, but Shauna and Turner do a lot of it. And they build the most, you would not believe the stuff that they build, given a server that is just up 24/7 and it's private and it's whitelisted and it's just there. Oh man, do they build stuff. They build amazing amounts of stuff. So we're not necessarily going to be hurting for switching to a more chilled approach where it's just not as tempting to make it be about let's blow everything up, let's be amusing on camera. You know, one of the things I've been getting into is something that Shauna also does, which I think is very appropriate for the streaming thing. And it is major in-game projects like removing an entire mountain or like me with the giant cylinder base and like building floors and things in that, sometimes it's very gratifying to just do something like that with the most dumb primitive possible tools and just grind away at it. Like Shauna has removed mountains with like wooden and stone tools, because like why struggle really hard to make fancy tools and get fussed about how difficult it is doing all of this when the purpose is just logging on and kind of grinding away at some task and patiently getting through it. Yeah, it's interesting. This is one of the things that we use a game like Minecraft for, is it's just kind of an occupation. It keeps your hand busy while you're thinking about other things or talking with your friends. If that's going on, usually I will show up and just sort of TP over and just kind of hang out. So, and I'm keeping my, I just heard a noise. You might have heard the noise as well or not. I don't hear anything else happening, so if I like have to go to the door, I will. I have a question that was getting by. I just started talking about all this stuff, which is fine because we might as well talk about stuff that's enjoyable and nice. But Infinity was asking another question, and I did say, like, yeah, I'll answer your questions as much as I can, so let's give that a shot too. How big of is an advantage to work in 192K compared to 48K? Is, yes, you will still have aliasing. No matter what you're doing, you will still have aliasing if you're doing stuff that sharp. Like if you make a super hard digital distortion that's just hard digital clipping, that will alias anything. But it won't be very loud, because there will be a big difference between where it starts aliasing and when you finally start hearing the results. As far, I'm not sure what the foldback distortion, I think, is what you mean by aliasing. And it's essentially the same thing as oversampling without all the extra processing. Like consider it as like 4 times oversampling without even more processing to put stuff back and forth into the low sample rate again. No, my cat died last year. I'm sorry. My sister's cat died just recently. The poor thing was very ill, and it got to one of those places where it's like, we need to take it to the vet and send it to the farm upstate kind of thing. So that's pretty heavy. She is doing this current distancing coronavirus thing with like a little extra grief. So my thoughts go out to her as far as that's concerned, because it's no fun being in the middle of all of that, being cooped up inside, and you also just lost your cat. One of her cats, she had another. So when you talk about being a big advantage, no, it's okay, it's okay. My experience, and I'm going to get back to the 190K thing. My experience with this cat was, it was kind of heartwarming in some ways. Because the thing is, like, she was getting really, really old. And when, you know, her final times came around, she went into a medical crisis at 3 o'clock in the morning. When there was no chance of, like, I live in Vermont. There's not like 24-hour vets in Vermont. That's not a thing. And so basically, the only thing I was able to do with this cat that you've seen in some of the streams is all I could do was kind of cuddle up with her and just be as comforting as I could, which maybe wasn't very, but I felt like it was kind of the least I could do. So the cat was warm and cared for as she passed away, and it was pretty heavy. But I mean, when you have a really old pet, that's the kind of thing that is inevitably coming. They don't live as long as people, other than maybe certain parrots or tortoises or things like that. But so that's something that you face. If I had more of a sense of it, or saw her suffering, or saw her trying to drag herself off into back rooms or something like that, because I'm not sure about a dog, but a cat will try to self-isolate if it feels it's going, then I would have taken her to a vet earlier, and she would have basically heroin overdosed, essentially, is what they do. It's not literally that, but it's like, yep, painkillers and stuff that are, it's a shot, it's an injection, but it's not an uncomfortable, it's like, okay, your pet is going to go to sleep so hardcore that they die. The pet basically ODs. And so it's not uncomfortable for the creature. I've done that on a number of occasions when it was obvious that the animal was like ill, suffering, starting to really hurt, stuff like that. That was not the case for this final cat that I had. She was real brave and was hanging in there, and didn't show any signs of like wanting to skulk off and find some quiet place to die or anything like that. But one night it just kind of came to a head. So that is what happened there. And there is no other cat. There is no further cat. So getting back to the 192K thing, essentially if you're talking about working at that, it's not so much about whether you have the like super high fidelity sounds nearly as much as it is about, are you doing heavy processing and are your sounds really bright? Like if you like mellow, softer sounds that don't have lots of high frequency content, you can easily get away with working at 44.1K and still producing something that sounds good, because there's two vectors of digital sound quality. And one vector is the sample rate, and that's for producing high frequency noises. The other vector is bit depth, and that's what I focus on with the, yeah, David, you go do that. I do not regret my experiences paying more attention to, even when she came and bugged me on stream, that was always very adorable. But the bit depth is where you get kind of the roundness and fullness and depth of the sound. Sample rate is where you get the brightness, the high frequency stuff, or a certain kind of like upfront and close clarity. So if you're doing like pop music or whatever, and the stuff that you do is going to be really bright, and you also want to distort and compress and stuff and have it be very saturated, very modern, a lot of stuff going on, you're not minimalist, you're doing lots of processing, those are the times that you would go for 192K, simply because you will have more of a capacity of doing that with less aliasing, because you're keeping track of this extra stuff, and you should be able to get away with a lot that way. Now my middle ground, which I think is adequate for anything that's minimalist, anything that's like mellower and still contained, like if you're doing full on mellow, if you're doing like Brian Eno or whatever, and you're like, all of my frequencies are in the mid-range, and it's all like either distant sounding, spacey, or whatever. In those circumstances, you can get away with 44.1 or 48K, because you won't be doing a lot with the highs, you won't be doing a lot with saturation and aggressive processing, and you'll get away with not having like any. 44.1K is already capable of being too bright to sound warm and analog for you. You might already be looking at doing stuff to get the sound that you want that happens to be rolling off highs. And so like if you're really into like classic analog sound and you're shooting for something that has like the warmth and dimensionality of classic music of any kind really, then you're probably not loading a lot of energy up around 20K or so. That's going to start sounding a lot more 90s and 2000s and super modern and stuff. And if you're shooting for like hey, this sounds as like expensive studio as the Beatles, or it sounds like Sound City, or it sounds like a Neve console. All of that stuff is going to be rolling off highs relative to DAWs. All of that stuff is going to be having you running things like Interstage or Coils or a bunch of plugins that I have that are just conditioners, that are just processing the sound and soaking up some of the extreme highs that don't get through analog chains under normal circumstances. If you like taking advantage of the capacity for digital audio to go like extra bright and clarity if you wanted it there, like in digital work, you can have this stuff that is set up in such a way where it's blending more warmly, and you're incorporating whatever you need in order to have a sound stage that feels more like the analog world. But then you can also have little elements that are poking out just wherever you like. Like you can pick something and be like, this is my bright little hat, so I want this to be supersonic so it can just sort of sit up here and be part of the mix. Or you can be like, I never did the idea for the Peter Gabriel evergreens, and that's still a possibility in future, where if you're doing like Peter Gabriel's Intruder, and it's got this big powerful drum sound, a lot of which is like a stone room and heavy compression. So the decays of that are not going to be like digital decays, because it's effectively the same as using amplification, picking up the decays of what sound sounds like when it's been echoing around for like 5 seconds. And an RT60 reverb time of 5 seconds means that by the time that's done echoing away, even if you've amplified it up, it's lost lots of high frequencies. That's just what air does. So you don't get the same thing from like a really dry artificial reverb that's sustaining all of the highs and keeping those going. You kind of have to build in some roll-off into the feedback chains to make that work. But at the same time, like Intruder, he's got this like metallic scratching sound with some kind of fancy condenser microphone, something in the studio that they had that had all the highs in the world. And that is sitting up top among the, big drums and stuff, the stuff that sounds more distant. And then you've got the vocal, and you've got a sort of creaking noise. And those are just mic'd up here so close to the condenser mic. Actually, Gabriel tended to use like a 58 or a 57 on his vocal, but regardless, whatever he used, when he's like, I know something about the closeness of the miking and the degree of highs coming off of that is part of the mix. It's part of the sound. They intentionally set it up so you've got this part of the mix is big, analog sounding. Part of the mix is like treble hyped, and it feels like it's like right against your eardrum, and that's intentional. It's the creativity of it going into stuff. And if you're doing that, you can use the DAW, you can use digital mixing to heighten that effect, have more of it than they had on the vinyl record. It's possible to take that farther. You have the entire mix, it's coming across like the vinyl record, and then you have the high frequency elements that are supposed to be disconcerting and too close included in the digital mix, just raw and brightened and stuff, with none of the roll-offs, none of the blend, and they'll just poke out and they'll feel very alien and not coming from the same place, and maybe that's the effect that you're trying to create. And if you're working at 192K, that further enables choices like that. So essentially, the sample rate I like is what I consider a happy medium. I like 96K. It's the hottest you can get off of certain converters and things. People like Lavery who don't believe in 192K have their stuff going to 96, and that captures all of the crazy highs I've heard off of analog and off of real audio things. I don't think that 192K gives you advantages, and I know a lot of other people who feel the same way, including very audiophile people who aren't just buying into like CD is perfect and stuff. It's not necessarily a given that going to 192K or anything else like that is going to give you better. I'm not sure if there's really a problem of going to 192K and getting much worse because of intermodulation distortion from the stuff that you're, like, if you're worried about that, then you have problems with your microphones and things. You should be using the 192K and then like a ribbon mic or a kind of pre that isn't ringing in the super highs. Like, if it's causing problems that you're letting through too many super highs, there's stuff you can do in the analog domain that'll very nicely deal with that. Like, you can take a ferrite choke, this little thing that you can clip onto a cable, and clip it onto a microphone cable and soak up some of that stuff in the analog domain, and then it won't bother you and it won't cause problems for you further down the chain. Some of these things are best dealt with like at the source, get it right at the source. Kind of like when I was demonstrating how to mic a acoustic guitar. So yeah. And then which plugins do worst at 192K? I would say ones that are not designed to operate at different sample rates, like the character plugins. The character plugins, you'd have to like what it specifically does at 192K, because all of the things it's doing for sound are scaled way up. I'm not sure what else would be doing significantly worse at 192K in general. You might find that some of the compressors and things aren't reacting with the way that you expect if the algorithm is just not adapting to the high sample rate that well. It's going to be different in all kinds of ways. Like, you might have small differences in behavior. It's not ever going to sound exactly the same at all sample rates. So, try them and see which ones work out for you and which ones don't. And hey, it is noon. So we got another 39 minutes to go. I have my pen. I also have something else that I can show you on the top of the hour. Can you guess what this is that I'm hitting with the pen? Airwindows website doesn't list the character plugins very significantly because they're from before I redid the website. And it is 12 noon. Meet the chimney cap. I got the chimney cap replaced with a different chimney cap that is not as attractive to birds. This is the one that was attractive to birds. This is the one that was letting in the sparrows all the time. And they would get stuck in my wood stove and I'd be freaking out. And it would terrify me. So this is your chance to see what the old chimney cap was like and why it might have been giving me that problem. And this is also my chance to make it into a hung drum. Not really, but if I hammered some other things. This is apparently a really good stainless steel. So basically, the way this works is it keeps off rain. It's a very high quality stainless steel. It's all sooty because this has been in use. So is my robe now, apparently. And the reason it's attractive to birds is birds can land on the top, yeah. Birds can also land here if they're little small birds. And if it's raining, If it's raining, they go, oh, let me get in here. It's out of the rain. Check this out. I'll perch on here, and oh, my wing is still sticking out into the rain. Where can I get that's farther in here to get away from the rain? And they'll like crawl through these areas. Like a giant bird, like a robin or something, can't make it, but a small bird can. And then it's like, oh, hey, here's this inside area. And I can perch on this edge, wah, and they fall down into the thing. And it's just sad for everybody that way. By the way, David, if my processing here, the compression, I've turned it down so that it's not super uber loud, and I'm trying not to shout. But if I need to evolve my processing on this, I'll do that as well. I know I'm not running like a de-esser or anything. I have yet to build the de-esser that'll work with OBS. I'd want to do one that doesn't require controls, because I think OBS is not letting me use controls at this time. But I could still do that. But anyway, this is the source of my grief as far as the birds are concerned. Because when they're small enough, they can climb all around inside this thing and then fall down the pipe. The one that I've got has metal grill, which is not that much smaller than the holes in here, but the metal grill is around the outside edge. So the bird can still land on the top of it, but there is no like super inviting place for the bird to be like, I should perch here, it's raining, I should come and perch in here. Instead, if it's like flies around the outside edge, it's like, grating. There's like wire here. There's no super convenient way for, like, they can grab the grating and like stand sideways being rained on, but there's no convenient place to sit in outside the rain. Nor is there a super inviting way to be like, come inside here further. It's extra protected. And so, although I have no guarantees, I do think odds are that will solve the bird problem. And I won't go into that place of like having a freaking coronary because there's wild animals inside my house. And in some ways it's like, oh, they're so small, why should I be that freaked out about them? But the chimney sweep who did this for me was like, yeah, you know, you actually don't want that, you know. They like bird spit and stuff, they have diseases and things, and you don't really want that zipping around inside your house, so maybe you don't want so much of that. And I was like, yeah, and I don't want much of that for other reasons as well. But that is a fine additional reason. So we're getting back into some of the, I could sample that chimney cap as a percussion device. Yes, indeed I could. Or I could use tin snips and have, if I washed it off real good, have a source of some really high quality stainless steel for percussion devices or anything else like that. We'll see. But I do have another question coming up, as it is 12:05. I was looking forward to this though, because I wanted to show you guys, like, this is the chimney cap. Thanks to the Patreon and everything, I was able to get it replaced. So I'm less worried going into the new year when it becomes like spring and stuff, that I'll have this extra stress going on that I really don't need. And it's just like more self-improvement. That also means that's one extra thing I don't have to save up money for. So get the heck off of my Patreon if you need to take care of yourself. I'm not going to say that, well, that is me saying it 3 times. But I do mean it. I get it that people want to help, but I'm taking care of the things that I really need to take care of, and that's one of them. So the more math you do in plugin, the higher quality loss, which is why you have Dither Float. Can you do anything about it for other plugins? No. No, that is only something that is attainable if the plugin developer builds it in, and they also have to be doing internal processing at a extended word length. Now, anybody doing VSTs, well, actually, that's a strong statement. I'm not sure that's true. People doing VSTs at 64-bit have the option of their internal processing also running at 64-bit. that is not to say that they're necessarily always doing it, and you might have people who maybe came from an earlier generation of plugin making who are using 32 and or 64-bit VST buses, but they're doing the same processing either way, and all of their audio processing is at 32-bit, and those are the things that are going to sound a little more plastic and cardboardy and thin and digital sounding. Because once you've done lots and lots of processing that way, and these are always the people who are like, digital is perfect because dynamic range, and dynamic range of floating point is infinite, so therefore there is no possible problem to be had, and that's where they run into trouble. People don't really get some of these concepts. But an earlier school, or a more by-the-book school of DSP, is capable of making that mistake and going up, floating point, everything is taken care of, and so all of my internal audio processing is floats. All of my internal audio processing is 32-bit, and we're just doing it all with that. And those are the guys that are going to lose a bunch of audio quality in their overprocessing, and it makes a different sound. Like, I don't think it's a good sound, I don't like it myself, but it is a different sound, and it's one possibility, certainly. But, you know, you cannot do anything about that for other plugins. You can work at 192K, and again, if you're working with bright sounds and processing them heavily, that's when 192K is going to become handy for you. And if you have any problems with the stuff people complain about, where they say you should not use 192K because you're going to have high frequencies interfering with the audio band, I've got a plugin called Average. Average does not tie to audio processing. Average is tied to sample rate. So you can run Average at 192K and set it to like an average setting of like 2 or 4 or something like that, and still not get anywhere near the audio band because it's all scaled up. Like averaging at 192K and setting it neatly to, you know, every other sample averaging, that's going to put a nice chill out roll off on the super high stuff. It will tend to help avoid aliasing. Like if you're doing a distortion and you put average, this is something you could do specifically because you're working at 192K. If you want to have a super clean, avoiding distortion, avoiding aliasing distortion at 192K, what you'll do is put something like average, which is a very clean way of doing it, or any filter, but like I said, average might be your friend as far as this for retaining all of the apparent audio band, but fixing this potential problem. And put average on, set it to like 2 samples, like adjacent samples, and then do your distortion. And it's going to take out all of the frequencies that would alias on you. It's going to do kind of the same thing like focus or whatever, in that it's going to filter stuff before it hits the distortion stage, and that will help prevent aliasing from happening. You can pre-filter stuff that you're going to distort. It'll help avoid that problem. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose that might be a good idea to do a plugin that is like, this is the plugin that is specifically meant for distorting at high sample rates, distorting at 96K, distorting at 192K. Here's a distortion algorithm, but before we go into it, I'm taking averages and I'm just whacking everything above 20K, even though the sample rate is happy to include it, because it's just going to whack any audio frequencies that are legitimately in the sample that would cause aliasing which is not legitimate for the sample. So that's a possibility. In fact, that's worth me writing down, so let me make a little note of it. At some point, I'm going to be making notes with the stylus and tablet stuff. I just haven't got all that working yet. I mean, it's working, and I'm kind of enthusiastic about the idea of doing some Blender, Krita. There are visual arts programs that are very cheap, and then there are visual arts programs that are literally free open source, like Blender and Krita. And although I can't give people graphics tablets, for the most part, like my Minecraft friends, actually, one of them needs a graphics tablet and I have a spare. But though I can't typically just give people fancy graphics tablets, I could talk you through learning how to do some of these programs that are free open source and that I can effectively give you by saying, hey, go and use this and let me show you how, and we'll do a stream about 3D modeling, or we'll do a stream about visual arts. And I'll be using the graphics tablets, and I'll be talking from a point of view of, like, this is me with my fancy studio or whatever. But I'll be talking about the use of the program that is accessible because it is free and open source. Similarly to how I think I finally figured out, and somebody asked a question about this. Let me write this idea down first, though. High sample rate distortions. And you don't actually have to do the same thing after the distortion. It's possible, but you don't really have to. It's before the distortion that'll give you aliasing. And averaging is also a really quick way of throwing a roll-off on the very highest stuff in the sampling theorem. If you start averaging large windows, that starts bringing in weird artifacts, but averaging like two samples next to each other is always going to just whack stuff that is closest to the Nyquist frequency in a fairly controllable way. And you can get a steeper result by having multiple pulls of it. I'm writing post semi-unnecessary because it's going to be fun when I finally dive into additional stuff apart from just re-releasing character plugins, because like I said, right now I'm keeping things a little bit more boring, but I am building up a list of cool things that I want to try. Like there is a thing I'm hot to try now because I was recently listening to a deadmau5 album, and I was listening to how he was constructing some beats, and they were flamming in this really interesting characteristic way that I feel I could make a plugin that was inspired by that. I'm going to call it Mauve because V is for Roman numerals for 5. But the idea is you could take a kick and like multiband it, but rather than like necessarily multibanding, compressing it or whatever, simply multiband it and then start putting little staggered delays in. And I could do this with like the bass drive stuff, or I could do this with Fathom 5 that can generate a sub-octave, all that kind of stuff. Basically, you generate your lows, you generate your head bump, you generate whatever, all that kind of thing. And then start delaying other things so that the subs hit first. Because to my mind, that is the secret to constructing groove. It feels like the ideal form of groove, rather than like fake 80s machine-driven stuff. Groove feels best when like the onset transients of everything going to their fullest peak are basically symmetrical. Like your low frequency thing that is like a sub 20 hertz whoomph goes up to its peak, and then your super high frequency thing that is a very bright little spike goes up to its peak, and they peak at the same time. They don't peak at the different speeds, whereas if you started them from zero, they hit their peak, they hit the maximum output at the same time, and that's what groove feels like. Whereas if you just sequence stuff and like beat detective it. Hello. Oh, I'm looking at live streaming, and my icon is showing a live streaming icon, and it's red light, but that means that I'm streaming. It does not mean that the stream is broken, and the stream doesn't show to be broken, thankfully. I keep trying to figure out how to do all of this. It's like, yeah, you're freaking me out here with the stream failing all the time, but today it's not failing, so maybe I've got it fixed. And the idea for this plugin would be to do a multiband thing where you'd be basically breaking up something like a kick into distinct bands, probably with pretty high isolation, and then time delaying the various bands so the low stuff hits first. And you're basically reshaping it even to the point where it sounds like it's flamming against itself. Like the subs are hitting, and then there's a flick, and the highs hit later, and you can dial in to what extent that works. That's something that I could try, and I'm looking forward to giving it a shot. I bet I can do something interesting there. So Infinity has another question beyond the 192K, which I think I've covered all up and down that 192K question. And Euroforex is asking something too. Can I make a compressor plugin using the code? Well, there's no point in using the code from Purist Gain because it's how it handles that, and the compressor plugins already use that. So my compressor plugins already use that code from Purist Gain. I promise. And they already used Etherfloat. Oversampling, I don't know. I'm not that into it. And they're already using internal processing. So the only thing you're asking for that isn't already happening in all the plugins that I do, including all the compressors, is oversampling, and I'm not necessarily a fan of oversampling. I think you should be using, and you are using 192K. I don't feel you need oversampling. And some of the stuff that I do, like for instance pressure, the compressor pressure, that's not a limiter. It has speed controls, it can do all kinds of really funky things. But these are plugins that respond in a particular way. They don't really have the same behavior. Like there is a type of reaction where, and I'll use my little pen to demonstrate this too. There you are. Didn't lose that. Say you got a waveform, and here's where your compression comes in. So if you responded to this by going, okay, we need to turn down the volume instantly upon hitting this to the point where it's turning down the volume infinitely as soon as it hits this threshold. And then once it starts coming back down again, the volume will start diminishing and the gain will start turning back up again. That's a compressor. But this corner point where it hits this is pure aliasing because it's making a really sharp change. That's not necessarily what all my compressors do. My stuff does things that give it better aliasing performance, because that's a really sharp edge. That's like a hard clip. A hard clip would be just cutting this stuff off and then coming back here. The compressor would be cutting this stuff off and then turning it down, and then when the gains, the level starts going back down again, it responds by going back down, and then a little makeup gain, we start release of the compressor. But either way, when you have that really sharp point, that's aliasing. You don't have to do that. Like soft clipping is having no single point where that changes, and it's really good about not inflicting high harmonics that way. And if you're compressing, what you can do is this. You have it with a slower attack, so that when it needs to start turning down, it increasingly starts curling over the waveform, and the threshold point that you hit, it won't successfully keep it quieter than that threshold point, but it will avoid having a sharp corner. And you can do that as gradually as you want. I've got plugins like Surge and Surge Tide that are doing this in such a gradual way that they will never produce anything like aliasing, because everything is levels upon levels of slowly kicking in of the volume gain. And the more you could smooth out these sharp corners, these sharp discontinuities in the wave, the more you're going to avoid aliasing, because you're not generating high harmonics. It's like having a compressor that's like a soft clip, and when you measure it, what you've got is just the next harmonic. Like you're at 1K, and so you get a 3K or something like that, and only that until you push it much and much harder, and then you get 5K, and only that until you push it much harder, then you start getting 7K. With enough of that, and if you roll off the extreme highs before hitting the thing, it simply won't produce aliasing, especially if you're running at a high sample rate, which it's quite capable of doing. Like the algorithm like density that produces the harmonics one at a time like that, it's still doing it at every frequency. Like 1K, 10K, 100K will always produce exactly, like odd harmonic is like 3 times the frequency. So it's always it'll produce 3K, or the 10K will produce 30K, and the 100K will produce 300K. Exactly, always the same no matter how you work it. But if you're running at 192K, you can produce 30K cleanly with no problem at all. So, there's where running at a high sample rate helps you, is if you're doing stuff like that. And if you're doing smooth functions like this, like the soft clip, like density or spiral, or a compression that doesn't instantly kick in with this really hard limiting behavior, but gradually kicks in, that stuff, like some of my compressors react so slowly they don't produce any harmonics at all. They act like automatic gain controls. They're incapable of reacting to anything quickly enough to cause a problem. Like any artifacts they produce are going to be well in the subsonic range. But the ones that are higher frequency, like pressure or whatever, can go much higher in frequency. And the speed control dictates how much aliasing it'll produce, if it even is producing that. If the speed control is really low, that's slowing its reaction so much that it's going to stop aliasing. If the speed control is really high frequency, so it starts getting really gritty, that's when you're starting to bring that in. You can dial in the amount of aliasing you want on it. And if you're running at a high sample rate, as long as it's still giving you the attacks and releases that you want, you'll be able to get higher speed processing, faster reactions out of the compressor, and still not be generating aliasing, and that's entirely from using the higher sample rate. So that's basically what you'll be doing. Like if you want to work with really bright digital sounds and have them be really upfront and hyped and still have some clarity, that's when you're going to want to go with 192K, because it gives you the options of using things like pressure, using things like distortions, and still not throwing too much garbage in there. And if you're not trying to do super hyped, or if you're not being super aggressive, your needs drop way down. And you're certainly going to be able to get away with 96K, and you might be able to get away with 44.1K if you're really minimalist, or if you like warm, gentle tones that aren't all bright and stuff. You know, it's all what you're trying to do. It's all what you're trying to get. Oh, but David, I have that. Go and play with D-Res. I've already got that for you. You're welcome. Merry Christmas. D-Res literally gives you aliasing. If you do the frequency crush on D-Res, it's going to like resample based on where it's interfering with a lower frequency that comes in, and it does, and that's exactly what it does. So yeah, you've got it. You're welcome. You probably already have it installed. If not, start fooling with it, because it is a good tool for doing that stuff with. And you should be able to automate the frequency control as well. That'll give you more effects. Yeah. That the low sample rate stuff is all about aliasing, and grungy low sample rate bit crusher stuff is aggressively about aliasing. Interestingly, you should be able to do that at high sample rates too, and you'll have to dial in more of it before you start noticing the result. I think that's how that's going to work. And yeah, that's specifically what that's giving you. That's giving you full-on aggressive aliasing. So as far as doing stuff that produces harmonics with unmelodic material like noise, it doesn't really care. Think of it more in terms of frequency ranges. Like imagine if you're using an FFT processor, Soothe or whatever, or some EQ that's designed to work in that way. And instead of having a test tone at 1K, think of a frequency band at 1K. So if you're doing noise, and your noise is like pink noise, there's going to be a particular range of that that's happening in the 1K area, and it's going to be at a given level, and that is going to produce harmonics much like with the test tone. So it's going to produce brighter sound off of the noise at a predictable level. So if you're thinking about stuff like noise, think about it in terms of a whole pile of test tones all at once, and they're going to predictably produce harmonics, artifacts, as if they were all of the test tones within the volume area that they are. Like white noise is effectively the same thing as all the test tones at once, including right up to the Nyquist frequency. Pink noise, up to the Nyquist frequency, but it starts to roll off, or it continually rolls off. And pink noise, you're still getting some stuff super high up there. That will alias. It's just that it's not easy to hear. Like, how are you going to hear aliasing of 20K off of pink noise when that is producing faint low frequency sound and you've already got really loud low frequency sound at the same time? The noisier stuff is, the more it's going to tend to obscure whatever aliasing you're getting. But the aliasing will still happen even on noise. It's just that you won't be able to pick it out as easily. And you could probably test this by heavily distorting pink noise and noting that the frequency content will get brighter. And the brighterness is harmonics being produced off of the noise, but it's not going to get uniformly brighter because it's also going to be generating lower stuff, and that's the aliasing going in. Interesting question about the tilt shelf. if you're using some kind of EQ going into density, that's not going to change the harmonics density produces at any given frequency, but you can manipulate what frequencies you're feeding it. So if you're feeding it a sound that's like melodic, but it covers this broad range and it's this envelope of like these lows and this mid-range and this highs and stuff, you can think of it in terms of like noise of the same profile. And if you filter that, it will have a positive effect on the aliasing. And you could use a tilt shelf to change the harmonics density will create given a broad band signal. Like you could process noise hats, and if you wanted to cut out, yeah, like I'm pretty sure, and I've never thought about this before, but this is me winging it. Let me give you an idea. I think if you had noise hats and what you were trying to do was sit them in a particular frequency range and you wanted to somehow use distortion on them. I mean, literally noise is, you could filter it into a narrow frequency band and then distort that. And you would get that frequency band plus probably the first harmonic that it generated. And depending upon what frequency band you were doing, it would take that noise hat and turn it into what, like, okay, think about it this way. You're EQing your noise hat. So you're throwing something on there. Let's say that it is like a biquad or something. Let's say you're using a bandpass. Let's say you've got the Q factor. You can turn the Q up so much that it's incredibly hyped out and you're turning the noise essentially into a test tone. If you have that, if you're running it into density or something like that, which is going to generate one harmonic neatly before it generates anything else, hit it at that level where it's generating the one harmonic that's fairly loud, but you're not bringing in anything else so much. It's a soft clip. If your resonant frequency is like 1K, then you're going to bring in 3K from the distortion, and it'll be very controlled and neatly defined. If, however, you're at like 44.1K, and that gives you like 22.05, and your Q of the resonant filter on your noise hat is like 16K, the first harmonic you generate off of the density filter is going to be aliased, because the test tone would have aliased. And if you turn the Q up so sharp that it's basically nothing but a test tone that's slightly warbly, if you run that into density and it's too high of a frequency, it aliases. It's going to be a lower frequency than the source. Then if you turn down the Q factor, it's no longer as resonant. That aliased sound that is lower than the source is also going to broaden out. It's also going to become a noise source, but it's a noise source that is lower and it's composed entirely of aliasing. So I guess the answer would be yes. If you do that thing, then what you're going to get out of it is a output that is shaped by the frequencies you're putting into the distortion quality. And if you're doing something that's a really soft clip like density, you'll get like one harmonic before you start getting anything else. And then you can shape that harmonic so that if you're putting content that is high up enough, it's like higher than 11K, that it would alias at 44.1K. Then what you'll get is the lower frequency, and if it's the noise that is up there, then you'll get the noise literally at the lower frequency too. So yeah, that is absolutely something that you could do regarding the aliasing. And I'm pretty sure that you'd be able to do that also with DRes and intentionally aliasing stuff, and it'll behave exactly the same way. Like if you have DRes intentionally throwing aliasing at like 7K or 2K, and you're doing stuff that is like, okay, and now I'm doing a filter, and the filter is at 1.5K, and DRes is throwing in aliasing at a rate of 2K, so the first harmonic is going to be lower than the 1K I started with. It will indeed be lower than you can construct things that way. Yeah, that is absolutely a thing. Now the thing, David, the thing about pre-ringing is pre-ringing has to do with linear phase EQ. I don't think that's going to have much of a significant effect other than it kind of blurs out transient information wherever it shows up. But yeah, but you can also use that as a tool. Like if you wanted to make something that blurred out transients a little bit in high frequencies, you can intentionally use linear phase stuff and high resonances, and that will generate more of a pre-ring or less of a pre-ring. Yeah, David, I hope you take care of yourself. Do the best that you can with it, and we'll be here. But yeah, I hear you, Ben, on the Righteous 3. I'm not sure that I have the code handy, but I'll bear that in mind. In fact, I'll even make a note of it. Not on the same one as the high sample rate distortion, because that'll be a new product, but sometimes I am happy enough to put out a existing thing because it just fits in with the flow of stuff that I already do. Yeah, maybe there will be a new channel which includes this high sample rate stuff. I don't know. That'd be weird, but we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, which brings us to 12:39. So that's 1 hour and 39 minutes, and that constitutes my Monday live stream. And you know what? My throat still doesn't hurt any more than it kind of already did. I dare say that'll be fine. And I'll tell you, I've been setting up, like, my dinner is going to be something made out of rice and chicken thighs, because last time I tried to stock up on food, they didn't have the kind that I wanted. They were like, oh, we have a 10-pound bag of this stuff. And I was like, okay. And so I've got lots of stuff packed away in the freezer. And I'm actually making a Welsh rarebit. Welsh rarebit is like toast and cheese. And I don't normally sit around eating lots of bread stuff, because there's to some extent I am slightly gluten intolerant. So if I'm not feeling well, I need to stay away from that kind of thing. And it can also mess with my digestion a little bit and stuff. But it's also really wonderful comfort food. And I'm down with that today. So I'll probably be setting myself up with some Welsh rarebit toast and cheese. Yum. And it's very soothing if it doesn't upset your stomach. I'll see how that works. I can probably avoid drinking too much coffee. Finish this coffee and then not make any more. And I will be setting up things like I'm working on updating the camera setup here a little bit. I'm working on updating this graphics tablet stuff that I'm setting up here, because there's some things I've always wanted to do with that. And this is the time that I can finally do it and have some time to focus on that. And my hope is that I can share some of the tools that I develop, much like I do with Airwindows. What I don't know is whether people following me are literally only interested in plugins and being given free plugins to do stuff with. I think that when I start doing the reviews of modules and releasing on SoundCloud 2496 of the module output, and somebody was asking, can I start including things like reverbs on that stuff too? Well, the reverbs I use are usually much too deep, but I certainly will have the capacity to run everything through, like, I'll be recording through the desk, and I could also run through the hardware compressor, and I could run through a reverb and just sort of like, you might do this and you might do this, and here's another thing that you can do, and just start cranking the knobs and things and spend a little time just experimenting, and then you'd be able to download the output of that and grab samples out of that. What I will not do is edit all the samples for you so that you just, you're plunk in this thing and then hit the stomp and kick button and stuff. Like, what I'm going to require from you if you get into this is you got to download the entire file and pick out your own samples and edit them in a 2-track editor. Or it probably will be 2-track if it is if it includes reverbs, because the reverbs will be in stereo. But I'm going to require that you do your own sample editing. I'm not going to spoon feed that stuff, but I should be able to deliver a big pile of analog goodness, including, my reverbs run through the SRS processor now. So I'm working with that too. And that can also be included in, like, the Airwindows grab off of the review kind of thing. And that ought to make stuff a lot more interesting for people. I feel like that is the answer to wanting to do this, and yet people don't really want to hear about modules, even if I like the makers, that they can't actually get for themselves. It's like, I can do that, and then you can get what I did with it in a format that I intend for sampling from. Because I'm still not really down with taking my music and treating it as a source for ways of people being able to get samples to make with their own music. I would rather work with modules and be like, here, I'm just going to make a bunch of sounds, and these are some raw sounds that you can use. This is a thing going through a filter. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I feel that's much better. The music is designed to be listened to, and my hope is if I do the one thing, then maybe people will be more excited about doing the other. Anywho, let me fire back up I didn't lose the stream even once. That's pretty cool. So I will say goodbye to chat for now. And I'll see you guys on Tuesday and Wednesday when I do music stuff again. And I'll be back with, and also the Wednesday Hangout stream with the Minecraft and stuff. Where we will be building up resources and switching over to another form of mod. And then you'll get another plugin on Sunday, and we'll go from there. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.